The morning sun filtered through the ancient stained-glass windows of Westminster Abbey, casting colorful shadows across the stone floor. Inside the private chambers, Prince William stood before a full-length mirror, his hands trembling slightly. As his personal valet made final adjustments to his ceremonial robes, the weight of centuries seemed to rest upon his shoulders, quite literally. As the heavy gold-embroidered fabric settled into place, William had always known this day would come. Nothing could have prepared him for the overwhelming emotions that washed over him as he looked at his reflection. The crimson velvet cape, adorned with ermine trim, transformed him from the casual father of three into something far more magnificent. His military medals gleamed against the rich fabric, each one telling a story of service and dedication to his country. "Your Royal Highness, it's time," whispered his private secretary, appearing quietly at the doorway. William nodded, taking one last deep breath. As he turned from the mirror, he caught sight of a small photograph tucked discreetly into the corner of the frame, a candid shot of Catherine and the children laughing in their garden. The image grounded him, reminding him that beneath all the ceremony and tradition remained a husband and father. The corridor leading to the Abbey's main entrance stretched before him like a pathway through history. Each step echoed softly against the ancient walls, where portraits of his ancestors watched silently from their gilded frames. William felt their presence, their expectations, their hopes for the future of the monarchy resting upon his shoulders alongside the ceremonial robes as he approached the great doors. The sound of thousands of voices singing hymns drifted through. The heavy oak, his heart hammered against his chest, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about a nation's hopes, Commonwealth's dreams, a family's legacy stretching back over 1,000 years. The doors opened slowly, and for a moment, William was blinded by the flood of light streaming in from the Abbey. Camera flashes sparkled like stars, and the sea of faces before him seemed to stretch into infinity. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw familiar faces among the crowd. Friends, family members, and dignitaries who had watched him grow from a shy young prince into the man he had become. His grandmother's favorite hymn began to play, and William felt a wave of emotion wash over him. She would have been so proud to see this moment, to witness her beloved grandson stepping into his destiny with such grace and dignity. The music seemed to carry her blessing, her love, her unwavering faith in his ability to serve their nation with honor as he began his slow, measured walk down the aisle. William noticed how the light caught the golden threads in his robes, creating an almost ethereal glow around him. The congregation rose as one, their movements creating a gentle rustle that seemed to whisper words of encouragement and support. Children pressed against the barriers, their eyes wide with wonder at the fairy tale prince before them. Halfway down the aisle, William's gaze found Catherine in the royal box. She wore a smile that managed to be both radiant and reassuring, her eyes sparkling with pride and love. In that moment, surrounded by all the pageantry and tradition, she grounded him once again, reminding him that love and family were the true sources of his strength. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey seemed to pulse with the weight of history as William continued his procession. Kings and queens had walked this same path for centuries, each carrying their own hopes and fears, their own dreams for their realm. Now it was his turn to add his chapter to that magnificent story, to prove worthy of the trust placed in him by millions of people around the world. As he neared the altar, William felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The nervousness melted away, replaced by a deep certainty that this was exactly where he belonged. The ceremonial robes no longer felt heavy. Instead, they felt like the embrace of history itself, welcoming him home to his true calling as a servant of his people and guardian of their traditions. The television cameras captured every detail as Prince William emerged into the full view of the congregation. But no lens could truly convey the magnetic presence that filled Westminster Abbey. The collective intake of breath from the thousands gathered was almost audible, as if the very air had become charged with electricity. This wasn't just a ceremonial appearance, it was a transformation unfolding before their eyes. Lady Margaret Henderson. Royal events for over 30 years, but she found herself reaching for her handkerchief as tears unexpectedly filled her eyes. There was something about the way William carried himself that transcended mere royal protocol. The young man who had once hidden behind his mother's skirts had become a figure of such dignity and grace that she barely recognized him. In the royal box, Princess Charlotte tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering in amazement, "Mama, Papa looks like a real king." Catherine smiled, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had watched William practice his walk countless times in their private quarters, seen him struggle with the weight of expectation and tradition. But now, witnessing him in this moment of triumph, she knew that all those years of preparation had led to this perfect culmination. The golden threads woven throughout William's coronation robes seemed to dance in the light streaming through the abbey's windows, creating an almost supernatural aura around him. Social media exploded with comments from viewers around the world, with hashtags trending within minutes. "He looks like he stepped out of a fairy tale," wrote one user. "This is what a real prince looks like," commented another. Archbishop of Canterbury watched William's approach with a mixture of pride and solemnity. He had known the prince since childhood, had watched him navigate the complexities of royal life with remarkable grace. But seeing him now, dressed in the full regalia of his heritage, the archbishop felt he was witnessing something sacred. A young man fully embracing his destiny. The foreign dignitaries in attendance exchanged glances of approval and admiration. President Martinez of Spain leaned toward his wife, murmuring, "Now there is a leader who understands the weight of tradition." The Japanese emperor's representative nodded in agreement, recognizing in William's bearing the same qualities that had made his own ceremonies so meaningful. As William passed each row of guests, those seated closest to the aisle caught glimpses of small, personal touches that made him seem more human despite his regal appearance. A tiny pin on his collar, a gift from his children, the way he briefly touched the medal his grandfather had given him. These small gestures reminded everyone that beneath the ceremonial splendor was a man who cherished family and personal connections. The choir's voices soared higher, their harmonies seeming to lift William's spirit even further. He had always found strength in music, and now the ancient hymns seemed to weave themselves into the fabric of his being. Each note carried the prayers and hopes of generations, connecting him to every monarch who had walked this path before. Hymn television commentators around the world struggled to find words adequate to describe the scene. Magnificent, breathtaking, and awe-inspiring seemed insufficient. The BBC's royal correspondent, known for his measured tones, found his voice catching as he described the moment. "In 30 years of covering royal events, I have never witnessed such a perfect fusion of tradition and personal grace." Children watching from their homes pressed their faces against television screens, their imaginations captured by the real-life prince before them. Teachers in schools across the Commonwealth would later report that their students spent days drawing pictures of the prince in the Golden Cape, their artwork filling bulletin boards with colorful interpretations of this historic moment. The international press corps, usually cynical and analytical, found themselves swept up in the emotion of the moment. Photographers who had captured thousands of royal images knew instinctively that these shots would become iconic, defining not just William's reign, but the very essence of modern monarchy. As William reached the midpoint of the abbey, the light from the great rose window above cast colored patterns across his robes, creating a kaleidoscope effect that seemed almost divinely orchestrated. The symbolism wasn't lost on the congregation, light illuminating the path forward. Tradition meeting the future, hope radiating from the heart of the ceremony. Even the most Republican-minded observers found themselves moved by the sheer theatrical beauty of the moment. This wasn't just pageantry for its own sake. It was the living embodiment of centuries of tradition. It's carried forward by a man who clearly understood both the privilege and responsibility of his position. The moment Prince William's coronation robes caught the full light of Westminster Abbey, something magical happened in living rooms across the globe. Millions of viewers leaned forward in their chairs, drawn by an inexplicable magnetism that transcended the television screen. In a small apartment in Tokyo, Elderly Mrs. Tanaka clasped her hands together, tears streaming down her face as she whispered to her granddaughter, "This is what royalty should look like." Back in the abbey, the distinguished guests found themselves witnessing something far more profound than a ceremonial procession. The Duchess of Marlborough, who had attended dozens of royal events, turned to her companion and whispered, "I've never seen anything quite like this. He's not just wearing those robes, he's inhabiting them." The crimson velvet seemed to flow around William like liquid fire, the ermine trim catching the light with each measured step. Young Prince George, watching from his specially reserved seat, sat transfixed by the sight of his father. The boy had seen his papa in many different roles, playing football in the garden, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework. But this version of his father was almost otherworldly. The golden embroidery on the ceremonial cape seemed to tell stories of knights and legends, making his father look like a character from the adventure books they read together. The foreign correspondents in the press gallery found themselves reaching for superlatives that seemed inadequate to capture the scene. Maria Santos from Brazilian television turned to her cameraman and said, "Are you getting this? Because I don't think words can describe what we're seeing." The interplay of light and shadow, the way William's presence seemed to fill the vast space of the abbey, created a visual symphony that defied simple description. Behind the cameras, the abbey staff, who had prepared for this moment for months, watched with quiet pride. The verger, who had helped arrange the ceremonial elements, felt a deep satisfaction seeing everything come together so perfectly. The way the morning lights streamed through the windows at just the right angle, illuminating William's path like a golden carpet, seemed almost divinely orchestrated in the royal box. King Charles watched his son with an expression of profound emotion. The weight of tradition, the hopes of a nation, continuation of a 1,000-year legacy, all of it was embodied in William's graceful movement down the aisle. The king remembered his own coronation, the mixture of nervousness and determination he had felt. But William seemed to have transcended those earthly concerns. Moving with a confidence that spoke of true readiness, the Commonwealth representatives in attendance recognized something significant in this moment. Sir David Thompson, High Commissioner from Australia, had been skeptical about the relevance of monarchy in the modern age. But watching William in his full regalia, he found himself understanding, perhaps for the first time, the power of symbols and tradition to unite people across vast distances and cultural differences. Social media platforms crashed temporarily under the weight of global engagement. Hashtags in dozens of languages trended simultaneously as people around the world shared their reactions. Hashtag Prince William, hashtag Coronation Magic, and hash Royal Splendor dominated timelines, with users sharing everything from artistic interpretations to emotional reactions to the historic moment. The abbey's ancient stones seemed to resonate with the collective awe of the gathered crowd. Historians would later note that this was more than just a ceremonial appearance. It was a moment when the abstract concept of monarchy became tangible, when the institution found its perfect human embodiment in William's dignified presence. Professional photographers, despite their years of experience capturing royal events, found themselves struggling to choose between shots. Every angle revealed new details: the way the light caught the jeweled clasps on William's robes, the perfect alignment of his military medals, the almost ethereal glow that seemed to surround him as he moved through the sacred space. The children's choir, positioned to the side of the altar, had practiced their hymns countless times. But as William approached, their young voices seemed to gain new power, as if inspired by the majesty of the moment. 8-year-old Emma, standing in the front row, would later tell her parents that singing for the prince felt like being part of a fairy tale television directors around the world made split-second decisions to hold their cameras on William longer than planned, instinctively recognizing that they were capturing something historic. The usual quick cuts and multiple angles gave way to sustained shots that allowed viewers to fully absorb the grandeur of the moment. As William neared the altar, the culmination of his journey, the entire abbey seemed to hold its breath. Ceremonial robes that had initially seemed like a costume now appeared to be an integral part of his being, as if he had been born to wear them. The transformation was complete, from prince to king in waiting. from man to symbol, from individual to embodiment of national hopes and dreams. The ripple effect of William's stunning appearance spread far beyond Westminster Abbey's ancient walls. Hospitals across Britain. Patients who had been watching the ceremony on their bedside televisions pressed their call buttons not for medical assistance, but to share their amazement with nurses. "Did you see that?" This became the most common phrase heard throughout the healthcare system that morning. As staff members paused in their duties to witness history unfolding. At the prestigious boarding school where William had once been a student, the headmaster had organized a special viewing assembly. The current students, many of whom had grown up seeing William as a somewhat ordinary former pupil, sat in stunned silence as their screens filled with the image of their school's most famous graduate transformed into something approaching legend. "Blimey," whispered one 15-year-old. "He actually looks like a proper king now." The fashion world immediately took notice of every detail. Designers who had spent years studying royal attire found themselves scrambling to analyze the craftsmanship of William's robes. The golden threadwork alone represented hundreds of hours of skilled embroidery, each stitch carrying symbolic meaning. Dating back centuries, fashion magazines would later devote entire issues to deconstructing this single outfit, calling it the most significant royal fashion moment of the century. In the royal mews, where the ceremonial coaches were housed, the grooms who had prepared for William's arrival watched on a small television screen. These men, who worked daily with the symbols of monarchy, understood better than most the weight of tradition William was carrying. "He's got the bearing for it," nodded the head groom, a man who had served the royal family for 40 years. "You can't teach that kind of presence. It comes from within." The international diplomatic community observed William's appearance with professional interest, but found themselves personally moved despite their training in political detachment. The French ambassador, a woman known for her reserved demeanor, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "There is something about the British and their ceremonies," she murmured to her aide. "They understand pageantry in a way that touches the soul." Back in the abbey, the assembled congregation had fallen into an almost reverent silence. The usual whispers and rustling of formal clothing had ceased entirely as William continued his procession. Even the most seasoned attendees, those who had witnessed countless royal occasions, found themselves experiencing something unprecedented. The combination of William's natural charisma with the magnificent regalia created an almost hypnotic effect. The Commonwealth Prime Ministers, seated in their designated section, exchanged meaningful glances. They had come to London with varying degrees of enthusiasm for the monarchy, but William's presence was shifting their perspectives in real time. The Prime Minister of Canada, who had privately questioned the relevance of royal traditions, found herself reconsidering the unifying power of symbolic leadership. Television ratings soared to unprecedented heights as word of William's magnificent appearance spread through social networks. People who had never shown interest in royal events found themselves glued to their screens, calling friends and family to ensure they weren't missing this historic moment. The phrase "you have to see this" echoed through countless phone conversations around the world. The Queen Consort, Camilla, watched from her position with a mixture of pride and reflection. She had seen William grow from a grieving young boy into a confident leader, but this moment represented his full flowering into the role he was born to fulfill. The ceremonial robes seemed to have awakened something regal within him that had been waiting for this exact moment to emerge. Professional historians in the audience made mental notes about the symbolic elements of William's attire. The way that ermine trim caught the light, the positioning of his ceremonial sword, the careful draping of the velvet cape, every detail had been planned to create maximum visual impact while honoring centuries of tradition. This wasn't just clothing. It was a masterpiece of ceremonial art. The children in the congregation, despite their usual restlessness during long ceremonies, sat perfectly still, mesmerized by the fairy tale prince before them. 7-year-old Lady Amelia, daughter of a duke, tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, is he really real?" The question, innocent as it was, captured something essential about the moment William had transcended ordinary human presence to become something almost mythical. The weight of global attention focused on William seemed to energize rather than burden him. With each step, he appeared to grow more confident, more regal, more perfectly suited to the role he was about to assume. The ceremonial robes initially worn now seemed to be wearing him, transforming him from within as he moved toward his destiny as he approached the final section of his journey to the altar. The morning light streaming through the abbey's windows reached its perfect angle, creating a golden pathway that seemed to have been laid out by divine intervention. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was a man walking toward his calling, supported by the light of history and the hopes of nations. The global conversation about William's appearance had evolved from simple admiration to something approaching reverence. In coffee shops across America, strangers struck up conversations about the British prince who looked like he stepped out of a movie. Social media influencers, typically focused on contemporary fashion, found themselves posting lengthy tributes to traditional craftsmanship and the enduring power of ceremonial dress. Within the abbey, the moment had taken on an almost sacred quality. The Right Reverend Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the officiating clergy, performed countless ceremonies in her career, but she found herself struggling to maintain professional composure. In 40 years of ministry, she would later tell her colleagues, "I have never witnessed such a perfect fusion of the temporal and the eternal." The royal protection officers, trained to remain alert and observant, found their attention divided between their security duties and the unprecedented spectacle before them. Even these hardened professionals, accustomed to extraordinary circumstances, recognized they were witnessing something that would be discussed and analyzed for generations to come. Princess Anne, known for her practical approach to royal duties, watched her nephew with unconcealed emotion. She had seen William struggle with the weight of expectation throughout his life, had witnessed his journey from reluctant prince to willing servant of the crown. But this moment represented his complete transformation into the role he was destined to fulfill. The ceremonial robes seemed to have unlocked something within him that had been waiting for this exact moment to emerge. The international press, corps, despite their professional cynicism, found themselves genuinely moved by the scene. Veteran royal correspondent James Harrison, who had covered the monarchy for 3 decades, turned to his colleague and admitted, "I've never seen anything like this. He's not just wearing those robes, he's become them." The distinction between the man and the symbol had blurred until they were indistinguishable. In the royal box, Prince Louis, the youngest of William's children, pointed excitedly at his father and whispered loudly, "Papa looks like the king in my storybook." The innocent observation heard by those nearby perfectly captured the fairy tale quality of the moment. Reality had transformed into something that seemed almost too perfect to be real. The Commonwealth observers, representing nations across 6 continents, found themselves witnessing something that transcended mere ceremony. The High Commissioner, from New Zealand, initially skeptical about the relevance of monarchy in the modern age, felt her perspective shifting as she watched William's dignified procession. "This is what constitutional monarchy should look like," she murmured to her aide. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey seemed to absorb and reflect the magnitude of the moment. The building itself, witness to nearly 1,000 years of coronations, appeared to be embracing William as he passed through its sacred space. The interplay of light and shadow, the echo of footsteps on worn stone, the whisper of silk and velvet all combined to create a sensory experience that would remain etched in memory. Television directors around the world made the unusual decision to abandon their planned shot sequences, instead holding their cameras on William for extended periods. The usual quick cuts and multiple angles gave way to sustained coverage that allowed viewers to fully absorb the majesty of the moment. Rating agencies would later report that viewership numbers had reached historic highs, with audience retention rates unprecedented for ceremonial programming. The financial markets, typically unmoved by royal events, showed unusual stability and even slight gains as international confidence in British institutions seemed to strengthen. Economic analysts would later note that William's commanding presence had somehow translated into measurable optimism about the future of the monarchy and its role in global affairs. Behind the scenes, the Abbey staff, who had spent months preparing for this moment, watched with quiet satisfaction. The verger who had overseen the ceremonial arrangements felt a deep sense of accomplishment, seeing everything come together so perfectly. The way the morning light fell across William's path, the perfect acoustics that carried the choir's voices, the seamless coordination of every element, it all seemed to have been orchestrated by forces beyond human planning. The moment had transcended its immediate context to become something universal. Viewers who had no connection to Britain or the monarchy found themselves moved by the sheer spectacle of tradition and dignity. The ceremonial robes, the ancient setting, the careful choreography of the procession, all combined to create an experience that spoke to something fundamental about human nature and our need for symbols that connect us to something greater than ourselves. As William neared the altar, the culmination of his journey, the entire abbey seemed to pulse with collective anticipation. The transformation from prince to king-in-waiting was nearly complete, marked by every fold of his magnificent robes and every measured step toward his destiny. As Prince William reached the altar, the culmination of his magnificent procession, the entire world seemed to exhale in collective awe. The final steps of his journey brought him to the most sacred space in Westminster Abbey, where the golden light streaming through the ancient windows created a perfect aureole around his ceremonial robes. This was the moment that would define not just his coronation, but his entire future as a monarch. The Archbishop of Canterbury, waiting at the altar, found himself deeply moved by the sight before him. In his decades of service to the church, he had witnessed countless ceremonies, but William's presence in his full regalia seemed to transform the very air around them. The prince's face, now fully illuminated by the abbey's ethereal light, showed a serenity and confidence that spoke of a man who had found his true calling. The congregation, which had maintained respectful silence throughout William's procession, seemed to collectively hold its breath as he took his final position. The ceremonial robes, which had flowed so elegantly during his walk, now settled around him like a royal mantle bestowed by destiny itself. The ermine trim caught the light one final time, creating a shimmer that seemed almost supernatural in its beauty. Queen Catherine, watching from the royal box, felt tears of pride and joy streaming down her face. She had seen her husband in many roles: as a father, playing with their children; as a pilot, serving his country; as a prince, fulfilling his duties. But this moment revealed him as something more, the embodiment of centuries of tradition, the living symbol of continuity and service that the monarchy represented. The international audience, numbering in the billions, witnessed something that would be remembered and discussed for generations. In homes across the world, families gathered around television screens found themselves part of a shared human experience that transcended national boundaries. The image of William in his coronation attire would become iconic, representing not just British royalty, but the enduring power of ceremony and tradition in an increasingly uncertain world. The children's choir, positioned near the altar, began their final hymn as William took his place. Their young voices, pure and clear, seemed to lift the entire congregation into a higher realm of experience. The music, combined with the visual splendor of William's appearance, created a moment of such profound beauty that many in attendance would later describe it as life-changing. The royal regalia, worn by monarchs for centuries, seemed to have found its perfect bearer in William. The ceremonial sword at his side, the golden embroidery covering his robes, the jeweled clasps and ceremonial elements all appeared to be natural extensions of his being rather than mere ornaments. The transformation from man to symbol was complete, yet somehow his essential humanity remained visible beneath the magnificent exterior. As the ceremony reached its crescendo, the weight of history seemed to settle upon William's shoulders like a blessing. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey, witness to nearly 1,000 years of coronations, seemed to acknowledge him as their newest custodian. The building itself appeared to embrace him, its Gothic arches and soaring spaces serving as a crown. More magnificent than any jeweled circlet, the moment would be analyzed, celebrated, and remembered long after the last notes of the ceremony had faded. Art historians would study the visual elements. Fashion experts would dissect the craftsmanship of the robes, and cultural commentators would debate the significance of the spectacle. but for those who witnessed it firsthand, the lasting impression would be simpler and more profound. The sight of a man who had found his destiny and embraced it with grace, dignity, and an almost transcendent presence. The global impact of William's appearance would extend far beyond the immediate ceremony. Tourism to Britain would surge as people sought to experience firsthand the settings where such majesty had been displayed. The image of William in his coronation robes would appear on countless souvenirs, commemorative items, and official portraits. But none would capture the full impact of that moment, when he had seemed to embody the very essence of monarchy itself. As the ceremony concluded, and William prepared to leave the altar, the final image seared into the collective memory was of a man transformed. The ceremonial robes that had initially seemed like elaborate costume pieces now appeared to be his natural attire, as if he had been born to wear them. The journey from the abbey's entrance to the altar had been more than a physical procession. It had been a spiritual and symbolic transformation that marked the beginning of a new chapter in royal history. The moment Prince William appeared in his coronation attire would be remembered as the day when the future of the monarchy became visible in its full glory. When tradition and modernity merged in perfect harmony, and when hearts across the world truly melted in recognition of majesty made manifest.